you hear good things.
It's a quiet Sunday afternoon in Independence, Missouri. James Kinne stretches out on the couch, drifting into a nap. The kind of ordinary moment no one remembers until it's the last. A single crack shatters the silence. A gunshot. James slumps, blood spreading across the cushion. And then Sharon's voice on the phone, breathless but controlled. She tells the police their 2-year-old daughter pulled the trigger, that the little girl found the gun and without understanding ended her father's life. When officers arrive, they find James dead of a gunshot wound to the head, the pistol on the floor. Sharon insisting it was all a tragic accident. The case seems open and shut. No fingerprints taken, no serious questions asked. Investigators call it misfortune. A husband gone, a wife widowed, and a toddler blamed. It wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of one of the most brazen stories of deceit, seduction, and murder in American history. And it all started in that quiet living room. I'm Sidney Smith, and this is Murderous Podcast. This week's murderess is Sharon Kinne. In part 1, The Pretty Widow. Independence, Missouri, in the 1950s. A town framed by church steeples and modest homes, where neighbors waved across fences and families marked their weeks by Sunday service. This was the heartland of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Smaller than the mainstream Mormon church in Utah, but just as insistent on values of family, modesty, and quiet obedience. Sharon Hall grew up in that current. Her parents belonged to the church, the RLDS. Her mother was strict, her father steady, and both raised her with the expectation that she would stay within the lines. But Sharon wasn't built for quiet obedience. To the outside eye, she fit the mold. A pretty girl with a reserved smile, attending church, sitting in classrooms where young women were taught to dream of motherhood and service. But classmates remembered something else behind her eyes. She was ambitious, restless, quick with a sharp word if you crossed her. One friend later said she wanted more than independence could ever offer. She wanted out. That hunger showed early. Sharon liked makeup a little heavier than her peers, her skirts just a shade shorter. Boys noticed her, and she noticed the power in that. In a town where most girls were taught to wait, Sharon leaned forward. She had no intention of being ordinary. By her mid-teens, she had set her sights on James Kinne. He was so much the opposite. He was steady, polite, and he came from a respectable family. Not flashy, but reliable. The sort of boy who would provide stability. Sharon began seeing him steadily, and soon after, word spread through Independence High School that Sharon was pregnant. In the 1950s, that rumor wasn't just gossip. It was scandal. It was leverage. And it was a ticket into marriage before adulthood had even arrived. Sharon told James He was going to be a father. And whether he believed it or not, he felt the weight of expectation. The Kinne family didn't want a public embarrassment. His friends quietly wondered why he was rushing. Her friends whispered whether Sharon was really pregnant or just using the story. At 16 years old, Sharon Hall became Sharon Kinne. They married in 1956. The supposed pregnancy quietly disappeared. Some classmates believed it had never been real. To Sharon, that didn't matter. The goal was achieved. She had moved herself from a restless girl in her parents' home to a married woman with a measure of independence. Not everyone celebrated. Some of his friends thought he looked overwhelmed, too young for the responsibility. Sharon's family, church-going and conservative, were divided. Some pleased that she secured a stable husband. Others whispering about the way it all came together. But again, Sharon herself seemed unfazed. Marriage wasn't about romance. It was about control. In the church halls of independence, most young wives slipped easily into roles of homemaking and child rearing. Sharon wore the same smile, but her own ambitions were louder. She wanted nice clothes, a nicer home, and attention. She wanted to be more than the girl walking the aisles of the neighborhood grocery store. And if that meant bending the rules, claiming a pregnancy that never was, pressing James into a life-altering choice, Sharon would do it. That pattern, small as it looked in 1956, was the first ripple of a much larger storm. Because Sharon Kinne didn't just want security. She wanted control. And this marriage forged out of a rumor and pressure was her first move in a game that would leave bodies behind. The first years of Sharon and James' marriage looked ordinary enough on paper. They rented a modest place not far from where both families lived. James worked as a draftsman, steady, but not glamorous work. He brought home a paycheck that kept the lights on and food in the fridge. But Sharon wanted more than groceries and a paycheck. She wanted polish, luxury. To friends, it was clear early. She didn't just want to be married, she wanted to be admired. Neighbors later remembered her as attractive and confident, the kind of woman who caught eyes when she walked into a room. She wore her hair styled, her makeup heavier than most women in their community, in the church. At socials hosted by the reorganized Latter-day Saints, the RLDS, where most women showed up in modest skirts and soft tones, Sharon loved to stand out. She would sit a little straighter, speak a little louder, and seem to know exactly when to laugh to make others look her way. James, by contrast, blended into the background. Friends described him as dependable, modest, even a little shy. At those same gatherings, James was the one helping set up folding chairs or talking shop with another man from the neighborhood. He wasn't magnetic, but he was steady. The sort of husband who took care of things without complaint. The contrast between them didn't go unnoticed. Some whispered that Sharon had married beneath her ambitions. Others wonder why someone as flashy as her has settled down so young. But the truth was simpler. Sharon wanted a secure base, and James offered that. What she didn't want was the quiet life that came with him. And I'm sure someone at that young age of 16 did not have the discernment to understand that when you marry one, you may end up with the other. In 1957, the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter named Dana. 2 years later, in 1959, their son Troy was born. To the outside world, the Kinnes were settling into the archetype of the young American family. Husband working, wife caring for two little ones, a future ahead. But the cracks in that picture showed quickly. Sharon's taste for new clothes, nice things, and nights out strained their budget. James' income as a draftsman wasn't enough to satisfy her appetite for more. Her parents noticed the tension too. They'd raised Sharon with stricter values. The idea that you make do, you stretch a dollar, you put family above appearances. Watching their daughter burn through money on clothes and luxuries only deepened their concern about where her marriage was heading. James's parents had their own worries. He confided to them that Sharon wasn't just restless, she was reckless. He suspected her of cheating, and not just once. He told his family that Sharon's flirtations weren't harmless, that her attention wandered, that she wasn't content with being quiet and domesticated. She wasn't happy with that life at all. And others in their circle noticed it too. Sharon was comfortable around men, maybe too comfortable. She liked the power of a glance, the thrill of being wanted, the chase of excitement. For James, that meant coming home to questions, to doubts, to a marriage that already felt unstable just a few years in. At work, his coworkers said he seemed worn down, sometimes distracted. He wasn't a man who liked to air his personal life, but even in passing, they picked up on his unease. That at home, things weren't right. Divorce loomed in the background, whispered between James and his parents, considered as a way out before the children grew older. But Sharon wasn't ready to let go of the image. To neighbors and church friends, she smiled and played her role. Housewife, mother of two. Inside the home, the balance was different. James wanted stability. Sharon wanted thrills. And it was that split. The housewife on the outside, the thrill seeker underneath, that began to define Sharon Kinne. She could wear the mask, but she couldn't keep it on forever. Because when a person wants more than they're willing to admit, it doesn't stay hidden. Not in independence, not in marriage, and not for Sharon. This was the stage set for what came next. A life that looked conventional, but underneath, a restless woman searching for a way to break out. And soon enough, violence would provide her escape. March 19th, 1960, a Saturday evening in Independence. The Kinne household looked calm from the outside. James had worked a long week and was stretched out for a nap, still in the clothes he'd worn earlier in the day. Two small children, a wife, and a modest home. Nothing suggested that within the hour, the entire life of this family would collapse. Sharon made the call herself, Her voice was steady, almost too steady. She told the dispatcher, "My little girl shot him." When officers arrived, the scene was jarring. James was slumped on the couch, a .22 caliber gunshot wound to the head, lifeless before they even walked through the door. Sharon's story was simple. Dana, just 2.5 years old, had been playing with her father's pistol. She liked pulling it out of his box, Sharon said. Tonight, she must have pointed it at James and the trigger went off. Police did what they often did in that era when a wife was upset, children were crying, and there was no obvious sign of struggle. They took her at her word. They asked a few questions. Sharon repeated her version, matter of fact. Dana liked playing with the gun. She must have done it again tonight. They tested the mechanics. A child could, in fact, pull the trigger. And with that, much of the suspicion evaporated. But some details didn't add up. For one, the bullet box. Officers noticed it was empty. Sharon brushed it off, but later investigators would call that deeply suspicious. Where had the ammunition gone? And why would a toddler's fingerprints conveniently explain the shooting, but no one thought to check Sharon's? No paraffin test was performed on her hands? No basic check for gunshot residue? If she had fired the weapon, no one ever proved it. The investigation was light, almost dismissive. In their report, police noted the possibility of accident, the young age of the child, and the absence of witnesses. And then they closed the book. The official ruling: accidental death. Just like that, Sharon Kinne was free to bury her husband. She arranged the funeral, accepted condolences, played the role of grieving widow, and quietly she collected on his life insurance, a payout of $29,000. That would be equal to more than $250,000 today. But neighbors whispered from the start. They remembered how Sharon looked at the funeral, not undone by grief, but composed, even polished. Some said she looked relieved. One recalled how she stood tall by the casket, accepting sympathy without tears, as if the moment belonged to her and not James. His co-workers, James' co-workers, had their doubts too. Seems like he had confided that Sharon spent recklessly, that she stepped out with other men, that the marriage was fraying. For them, the idea of a toddler accidentally pulling the trigger felt like a cover story. His parents were stunned. They had always considered James steady, cautious, the kind of man who avoided risk. For him to die by a child's wandering hand, it seemed cruelly out of place. Quietly, they told friends they didn't believe Sharon's story. But in 1960, challenging it meant challenging the police. And the police had moved on. So Sharon walked away with money, freedom, and a new reputation. The young widow whose child had made a tragic mistake. Later, investigators will look back at this moment in disbelief. The ease with which Sharon passed through suspicion. The lack of forensic test. The blind acceptance of her story. The money waiting on the other side. It read less like an accident and more like the first move in a long game. And if it was, it worked. Because James Kinne, the quiet draftsman who once hoped marriage would bring stability, was gone. And Sharon, still in her 20s, was free to begin the next chapter. One that would be marked not by grief, but by more death. James had been in the ground barely a few weeks before Sharon began shaping her new image. Not the broken widow, not the woman flattened by grief. Instead, Sharon reemerged in independence, polished, glamorous, and most of all, free. The life insurance check arrived, $29,000. Now, don't forget, folks, that $29,000 today would be about $250,000. And for most families in the 1960s, or in 1960 to be more exact, that would have meant security. Paying off a mortgage, maybe putting money away for their children's futures. For Sharon, it meant something else entirely. She drove to a dealership and bought herself a brand new Ford Thunderbird, a car that gleamed under the Missouri sun. The kind of vehicle that turned heads when it cruised down the block. Neighbors remembered the sight. Sharon, hair coiffed, sunglasses on, sliding behind the wheel of a machine paid for by her dead husband's life. The Thunderbird was more than transportation. It was a signal, a statement that Sharon was not shrinking into widowhood. She was stepping into something bigger. She didn't stop there. Sharon began dating openly, something almost unheard of for a woman so freshly widowed in that era. She left her children with relatives or friends, shrugging off the expectations of motherhood. To the people who watched her come and go, it seemed as though her kids were background noise to a story centered entirely on her. That town, those folks, they took notice. The men gossiped about her beauty, how she had a way of making every man in the room feel chosen. More than one married man admitted later that Sharon had flirted with him, that she seemed to feed off the attention. The women whispered too. They called her flashy, dangerous, a woman who lived fast and thought little of consequences. Some said she was reckless with money, flaunting what James' death had given her. Others just shook their heads at the way she paraded through town in her Thunderbird, children nowhere in sight. But Sharon thrived on the attention. Every whisper, every sideways glance only seemed to add to her allure. And then came Walter Jones. Walter was a car salesman, the kind of man Sharon noticed, confident, charming, eager to impress. What started as flirtation became an affair. For Sharon, Walter offered excitement. Another step away from the image of a dutiful housewife she had so clearly abandoned. But Walter came with his own complications. He was married. His wife, Patricia, was known in Independence as friendly, dependable, the opposite of Sharon's glittering edge. And Sharon, once again, stepped directly into a triangle where jealousy and desire would mix into something lethal. For now, though, she basked in her reinvention. The image that lingered with those who watched her in 1960 was not one of mourning. It was the sight of a Thunderbird gliding through independent streets, chrome flashing in the sun. A glamorous young widow at the wheel. And the unspoken truth riding along with her, that car was bought with blood money. An echo that grew louder each time she turned the ignition. You've been listening to a production of Sidney Smith Creative LLC and the You Hear Good Things podcast network. All rights reserved. For more true crime stories that stay with you, follow Murderous Podcast on your favorite platform and join us each and every week. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious.